Well, we've been doing this series about locating ourselves within the stories that shape everything. And this morning, I want to talk about locating yourself in the story of your relationships. And I have to tell you that across all the years that I've been preaching, every time I decide to preach a series about a sermon about personal relationships, I pretty much always end up regretting it. Because it becomes apparent that when people hear that I'm going to talk about relationships, they come to that sermon with all their own relational frustration and think that my sermon is going to solve all their relational frustrations. So, they hope that I can figure out how to help them find the close friendships that have eluded them. We've all struggled with that at times. I did when I was younger. Or that I can help them justify their feelings that it's always other people who are letting them down. You know, a lot of us are just looking for that justification. Like, people keep failing me, and I need somebody to tell me, you're right, it's not you, it's them. Or help them solve all their relational problems with three little, packaged principles that don't require any self-reflection. So let's just be clear that I'm about to fail you with all of those this morning. But just because there are not quick fixes for all that frustrates our relational lives does not mean that there are not amazing places we can grow that will change who and how we do in relationships, who we are and what we do in relationships. So I think Jesus is an interesting study in relationships. This is one of the things I love about the Gospels, is that, what if you only had the epistles in the New Testament? Here's all the things you should believe about Jesus and about life. But instead, we get to watch Jesus be with people, move with people, talk with people. And I think a really interesting study is this story that many of you, maybe even most of you know in John chapter 8, about the woman who is caught in an illicit affair and brought before Jesus. Because Jesus, and I'm going to talk about that story for a minute, but from kind of a different angle than the way we usually look at it. Jesus is navigating several different kinds of relationships in this one event, right? He's navigating a relationship with the Pharisees and the scribes, who are the religious professionals, keeping everybody in line. So they're the ones who drag the woman before Jesus, and Jesus has a certain relationship with them that is sometimes okay, but is often adversarial. He's navigating the relationship with the woman, who we assume he doesn't know. We don't know that for sure, but we assume that that's a new relationship, and yet he and this woman have been thrust together in this setting, where everybody is looking at Jesus and saying, what are you going to do with her? What are you going to do to her? So there's a relationship. Then he has the relationship with the crowd. There's a whole crowd in the temple courts watching this thing, and so Jesus has to be thinking about, he's got to be aware that what he does, what he says, is going to have some bearing on his relationship with that larger group of people. And then he has his relationship with his own, I've started to call them his friend disciples. Whenever I call them his friends, I can see people are like, does he mean the disciples? And whenever I call them the disciples, we hear that religiously. They're his friend disciples. They're his people. And he's got that relationship because my guess is that afterwards, those guys came to Jesus, those men and maybe women came to Jesus and said, so you kind of ditched the law of Moses there, right? Because the Pharisees, they bring this woman and they say, hey, we caught her in the act of adultery, and the law of Moses says that we're supposed to throw rocks at her until she's dead. And you probably know the story. Jesus mysteriously bends down and starts writing on the ground. We didn't really know what he was writing. I have some theories that I won't go into this morning. They're probably right, but no. So he starts writing, then he stands up and he says, here's the deal. How about the person who doesn't have any sin, you throw the first rock. And, the older you get, the more wisdom you have. So it says, from the oldest to the youngest, one by one, they dropped their rocks and they walked away. And then he turns to the woman and he says, where are those who condemn you? And she says, they're gone. And Jesus says, well, neither do I condemn you. And I like how it says it in the First Nations version. Jesus says to her, then go in peace and try not to return to your broken ways. I love that. So this is the whole story, but he does basically say, today we're not following the law of Moses. Not this time. And I'm sure the disciples come to him, and then he's so he's navigating that relationship. So that's fascinating to me. I think Jesus is very aware of two things. I think he's very aware that his words and actions need to offer different things to each of those groups of people, right? Every relationship is different. And so that's interesting. Think of Jesus in one setting with 4 groups of people, or a person and 3 groups of people, and he's thinking like, how is what I do and say in this moment, how does it work in these individual relationships? And I think he's also very aware that as different as these relationships are, there is a big difference between just reacting in each of these relationships and navigating those relationships from a centered place inside himself, which is mostly what I'm going to talk about this morning. He could have reacted to the obvious threat the religious leaders were bringing at him, or he could have reacted to the pressure of making the wrong call in front of the crowd. That would have changed his relationship with the crowd, which was pretty pro-Jesus at that point. Like the religious leaders, he could have succumbed to the temptation to feel powerful over that woman. We've all done that. In fact, we're probably all doing a lot of it today because of all the cultural, tension that's going on, is we're looking at people, and it makes us feel stronger if we can at least say that those people are really bad. And that's what the Pharisees were doing, and that was certainly Jesus could have succumbed to that temptation. Or, later he could have been defensive with his friend disciples when they asked him about setting aside the law of Moses. But there is a who Jesus has become and how Jesus has come to think, out of which he lives in each of those relationships in the moment. And I call this Jesus living relationships from a centered place, which is as different as can be from living our relationships in a reactionary way. Another way to think of this is that Jesus seems to have this rich repository inside himself by which he knows who he is and from which he moves in his relationships. And even as I reflect on this, and I was thinking about it this week, and I speak these words to you this morning, I can hear Brother Paul in Romans 12 saying these words to us. Don't be conformed to the ways of this age, but rather be transformed by the renewing of your mind. There's a way to be different. Our question should be, what is it? By the way, the word that Paul uses there, when we think mind, we think intellect. It's the Greek word nous, and it's all of this. It literally translates as the center. Be transformed by the renewing of your center. And at the risk of maybe sounding just a tad technical this morning, I want to suggest to you this morning, because I just think it'll help us break down what Jesus has inside himself that allows him to navigate relationships in the way we see, in the ways that we see in the Gospels. I want to suggest to you this morning that this repository inside Jesus has at least 2 dimensions to it. One being what I'm going to call the ethical dimension, and one being what I'm going to call the existential dimension. The ethical dimension is simply the integrity Jesus desires to cultivate within himself and the way he sees people around him. We hear it in the Beatitudes, right? We hear it in the Sermon on the Mount. We hear it in these words. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of the heavens. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for everything to be right, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, or as our friend Andrew DeCourt translates it, blessed are the compassionate, for they shall obtain compassion. Blessed are the pure in heart, those who want right motives. That's what that's about. Blessed are those who want a right heart, right motives, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they are the sons and daughters of God. This is the way. I don't think Jesus prepared that sermon. I think it came out of him because it's who he was. It was how he had come to think. It was how he had come to think about human life. So, and we see Jesus' ethic in how he treats people, particularly the compassion he shows people, how he looks past people's failures, which the religious people couldn't do, and a lot of religious people can't do today. He looked past people's failures and saw them as valuable and treated them with dignity. And then also his complete rejection of dominating power. Jesus rejects dominating power. He chooses a life of humble love and service. He washes the disciples' feet. He goes to the cross. He would sooner die for you than destroy you. That's his rejection of dominating power. He's not going to force you to be different. He's going to love you into being different. So we often muse about how almost strange it is that Jesus didn't start to teach until he was 30. That's always been kind of a mystery to me. Like, he was Jesus, right? Could have showed up at like 3 years old and been like, all right, I'm going to tell you guys how this all is supposed to be, right? But I don't really think that's how it was, even though I'm a Trinitarian, and I believe that Jesus is the mysterious appearance in human form of the Christ, of God, who, so I believe that, but I think that until Jesus begins his ministry and we begin to see that showing up in the Gospels, I think that these things that we hear coming out of Jesus in the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, his other teachings, the things we see in Jesus, the way he sees people, the way he treats people, I think these were being formed in Jesus over those years. So here comes my strong statement of the morning. Still talking about this, want to talk about this business of sort of the ethical dimension of what's inside Jesus. And then we'll get to the other one. But here's my strong statement for the morning. For the most part, this rich repository that Jesus has inside himself, the way he sees human beings as God does, and his understanding of how to offer people what is life-giving, is not strongly present in the Christian community today. One of my great and most depressing epiphanies of the last few years is that you and I are heirs to a Christian movement that has not, over the last several decades, reflected deeply on the ethical dimensions of Jesus. We thought we were because we waved pro-life signs, and we thought this is all we really need to know about the ethic of Jesus. But if you read the Beatitudes, if you read the Sermon on the Mount, if you watch Jesus, you listen to his teaching, how Jesus thinks about what it is to be a human being, how to see human beings, and how to move toward and treat human beings is way, 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 way bigger and more multidimensional than that. But we are heir to a movement that has not reflected deeply on the ethical dimension of Jesus. We got people saved and ready for the rapture, and we told people that Christianity was about keeping a set of rules found in a book, we railed about a couple of big cultural issues, but we did not talk about how Jesus regarded and related to human beings. We did not preach the Beatitudes. We did not preach the Sermon on the Mount. And frankly, it left the modern Christian movement, it left us as Christians without an ethical center. That's why we have the incoherence of Christians opposing abortion, but rejecting all attempts to regulate the number one killer of children in America, which is guns. Christians are pro-life when it comes to abortions, but the same proportion of Christians oppose any attempt to just regulate guns a little better. That's ethical incoherence, It's why inequality is on the rise in our culture. Various people are having their rights stripped away in our culture. We see things like the genocide of Palestinians in Gaza, and Christians are cheering for the people who are fostering those things. That's ethical incoherence, because the way we thought about the gospel and how we thought we were listening to Jesus, it really left the modern Christian movement without an ethical center. And ethics, by the way, are complicated, and we don't like that. We want somebody to stand up, yell loud, tell us what the answer is and how we should think as Christians, and then we'll go, yeah, I'm with that group, instead of saying, this is kind of a tough question. There might be more than one side to it. It might not always be this or always be this. We might have to, God forbid, we might have to become people who think deeply about some of these things. So I speak about these things because we need to be reminded of them, that Christians today are struggling and many times failing when it comes to the ethical dimension. But I also say this because they reveal our lack of ethical grounding. So we need to understand that this dearth of ethical grounding cannot help but also be the reality in our personal relationships. If you see Christians struggling with ethics in the public sphere, you're going to see Christians struggling with ethics in the relationships in their lives, because we have not been listening closely to what is good and true and beautiful and life-giving. It's really interesting when you start to get really intentional about seeing everyone in your life deeply, like really seeing them. I don't know if you've thought about that much, but you might want to try it. Although it will mess you up. Because there was a point in my life, everything is a process, I mean, if we're honest, but there was a point in my life when I was younger where if you'd have talked to me about the people in my life, I'd have just said, oh yeah, that's, so-and-so, and that's so-and-so, and that's Linda's cousin Nancy right there, and she, this is her life, and I would have just described to you the obvious things of people's life. That really is Linda's cousin Nancy. So I would have just described to you like the obvious things of people's lives. But I never really looked at any one person and wondered about them and thought, I wonder what they've been through. I wonder what they're struggling with in life at this point. I wonder what brings them joy. I never thought those kinds of things about people. And then I came to a point in my life where, and that's a long story, but God, did what he does, which is sometimes like put us in a blender and hit the high power button and, mess with our circumstances and our souls until we say, am I missing something? And then God says, yes, actually, you are. So let's talk about that. And I began, through all that process of mess in my life, I began to see people. I began to become more compassionate. And it's really interesting when you start to see people, when you decide that you want to have, and this is a terrible admission, I guess, in a way, that you really want to have integrity in how you treat everyone in your life. Because I'll be honest and say that when I was a young man, I don't think I had integrity in a lot of the ways that I treated people. But when you become aware that every day you make these little ethical decisions in your relationships about how you see people, about how you treat people, about those bad thoughts that come in you, and you decide that you're either going to run with them or you're going to kick them to the curb again. We all wrestle with that all the time. And when you say, I want to be intentional in how I see people and treat people, it just really changes things. Like, there was a point where I just thought, Linda's my beautiful young wife, and we're going to have this great life together, and that's kind of what I need to know about Linda, And then there was a point where I began to realize there's a whole world inside my lovely wife. Do I know that world? Do I know what she has struggled with? Do I know what she longs for? My kids as they grew up, and I began to see them becoming these full, multifaceted human beings. Do I see them? Am I tracking what's going on with them? My friends, am I aware how my friends are struggling? Would my friends let me see if they were struggling? Because not in all friendships do people let each other see when they're struggling. Lots of friendships are, hey, we watch the game, drink some beers, we, whatever, but that's it, And so, I have often thought, I'm a pretty good guy overall, right? But when you really start to ask, how do I see this person or that person? Did I treat them well today? Was I grateful for them? Was I attentive? Was I concerned for their wounds? Did I contribute to their joy? That was like a huge revelation for me. Somewhere in my late 30s, early 40s, where I was like, wow, what if I was looking at the people in my life and asking like, do I contribute to their joy? How can I contribute to their joy? When you get intentional about these, you realize that you've kind of sucked at a lot of them. I mean, you do. And you say, oh, and then you want to be better. You want to love better. And this is what Jesus knows. Jesus knows what loving better looks like. And let me read you a little passage from John chapter 5. Jesus knows what loving better looks like. And he tells us this because he knows the Father, because he knows God from whom he has come. And this is how God loves. That's something we kind of, like we got this half love, half wrath God going on in the Christian community. And yet Jesus is always telling us, no, see, this is how the Father loves. This is what he's like. So Jesus says this, I speak from my heart, he said to them. The Son only does what he sees the Father doing. For the Father and the Son do the same things. The Father loves the Son and shows him everything he does. That's what Jesus is saying, is that this is what love looks like, and I see it in God, and now you guys see it in me. And so now you know what it looks like. So I guess maybe the way to sum up talking about this ethical dimension of this repository inside Jesus that he does relationships is simply this. Jesus is clear on what love and goodness look like. He's clear on it. He's clear on it in every situation, and when you're clear on it in every situation, here's what happens. It crowds out being reactive in your relationships. Lynn and I have this joking thing we sometimes say where we say, the only relevant question in a crisis is, what is the right thing to do? Because in a crisis, you're like, And the right question is, Jesus knows the right thing to do. He knows the tenderness to show. He knows where to hold the truth line with people. He knows what it is because he's clear on what it is in here. And that's what we have to grow into. Now, I want to shift kind of 180 degrees and just talk about the existential dimension of this repository in Jesus, this centered place. And I know that existential is like a $10 college word, but what it means is simply the core of how Jesus thinks about who he is, his existence as a person. And what just leaps off the pages in the Gospels is that what makes Jesus know he is okay, what gives him his own sense of who he is, the security in his soul, is his connection to the Father and his understanding of himself to be the beloved of God. That this is who he is. He has this intimate relationship of belovedness with the Father. Now, I know we talk in masculine terms, and I know that somebody's sitting out here this morning because we're a big thinking church, and they're saying, "Don't forget the feminine side of God, Pastor Fran." And I won't. There's a great quote back there. I think Penny, where's Penny? Did you write that quote up there about, as surely as God is our Father, God is also our mother? I believe that. There's lots of places in the Bible where God is described in feminine terms. God says, I nursed Israel at my breasts. A man can't do that. So God's painting himself in feminine terms. So I get that. Jesus is living in a patriarchal culture. He uses the father imagery. Get over it. It just is. It doesn't mean it's the only dimension of God, right? But Jesus says, it's because Jesus has this relationship with the Father that he knows who he is. That he has this sense of his own identity. So when Jesus tells the disciples on that last night that they are loved by God, and he says, the Father and I will come and make our home in you, and we will never leave you, he's telling them his own reality. He is saying to them, this is where I live from, and you can live from this place too. I love in 1 John when John says that they found all this new life in Jesus as they walked in him. I don't know if you know that passage, 1 John 1, the life appeared. We saw it with our eyes. We touched it with our hands. And he says, we found all this. And then he says this, and we're telling you this so that you can have this communion with God also. That is the heart of the Christian life. The heart of the Christian life is not a set of ethics or rules or principles as propositions. The heart of the Christian life is not a set of propositional beliefs. I read the Bible and I believe all the right things, or I know the historic beliefs of the church and I believe all the right. The heart of the Christian life is not the rituals you do or those kind of things or the songs that you sing. The heart of the Christian life is intimate communion with God. And the other stuff never lasts if we don't find that. So Jesus is saying, he's telling them, this is where I live from. Is this place of connectedness and knowing how the Father sees me. This is where I live from, and you can live from this place too. And here's what it is. As you come to understand that you are crazily, wildly, unreservedly, beautifully, personally, and unconditionally loved by God, and you're loved from within because he is mysteriously in you. When you begin to understand that, it starts to become your identity. It starts to become the way you understand your human existence. And it's mysterious. I can tell you that when I was a younger man, my identity was wrapped up in, Well, and in truth, our identity is also always multifaceted, right? You are the person that you are at work, and you are a person in maybe your primary relationships, and you may be, if you're Mike Enzian, you're a person who can't stop fishing, and that's part of your identity. So there's lots of things that make up kind of who we are, right? But when I was a young man, it was all those pieces. And now it's my belovedness in God. That I am the beloved of God, period. And that this is the thing that defines who I am. And then all the other stuff is just, the cool and quirky ways that God made me, and the things I love, and the things that I do, and the relationships that life has put me into. And I'm telling you from my own life that it's a game changer, primarily because of the way that my wonderful sense that God accepts me as his child kind of naturally supplants a whole set of fears in my life. And I'm not saying I never get afraid. I don't want you to hear me say I've arrived or anything like that. But it's almost difficult to exaggerate the difference in this regard between who I was 30 years ago and who I am today. And again, I'm not saying I've arrived, but 30 years ago I was unsure of who I was. I was unsure if I really had value. So I often tried to act like somebody important. I can see that now. I was afraid that everybody else knew something I didn't. They had something figured out about life I didn't, and why wasn't I catching on, and why didn't I get it? I was afraid that my mistakes disqualified me with God, with people all around maybe. I was afraid of those who criticized me when I tried to do what I thought was the right thing, which is, by the way, exactly what Jesus says at the end of the Beatitudes, after he talks about having right motives and hungering to see things set right and being compassionate and being meek and all these things. At the end he says, and blessed are you when people persecute you for thinking and living this way. But I often crumbled under the criticism of people, even when I was trying to do the right thing. I was so afraid of the people who would criticize me when I was trying to do the right thing. So today, here's where I operate from. Most of the time, right? That's my caveat. I know I'm loved with a love that nothing can take me out of, not even my own failures. I believe that today. That one I never really doubt, ever, anymore. I know that I'm loved with a love nothing can take me out of. That's Paul in Romans 8, right? Nothing can separate me from the love of God that's in Christ. Not my own depression, my own fears, my own mistakes, not my own anything, and certainly not you. Nothing can take me out of the love of God that has been given to me. I know the weird and wonderful mix of who God made Fran Lehman to be. I operate from that place. I accept that I'm quirky. I accept that I'm not exactly like you, and in my younger life, I was trying to figure out how to be exactly like you so that everybody would accept me. I accept that that is not the case anymore, that I'm going to be me, and you're going to be you, and actually what we should be doing is saying, you're kind of weird, and it's kind of cool. I know that other people are wrong as often as I am. Ooh, maybe more. Yeah, they're probably definitely wrong more than I am. So, but that's a big deal, because when I was young, when there were disagreements or people had different opinions, I always thought, yeah, I'm probably wrong. I'm probably the one who made the mistake. I'm probably the one who doesn't get it. But everybody's a work in progress. And when I'm trying hard to have a right heart and align with the heart I see in Jesus and the ethic Jesus has convinced me of, there's nothing to be afraid of. Sometimes people don't like things I say. I know that shocks you. Sometimes people don't like things I do. I've gotten a lot of criticism the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years for some of the ways that my faith journey, and hence how I see certain people, how I move in life. And I've got a lot of criticism, but you know what? It's okay. Because Jesus told me that was going to happen when I was trying. Doesn't mean I get it all right. I'm not saying I've gotten it all right. Jesus just said, when you try to get it all right, you try to follow these things, that's going to happen. And so I operate from a place where I say, that's okay. I operate from a place where I know I fall short, but I'm loved, and I want to be eaten alive by that love, and I want to get better and better at letting it flow from me to other people. Now listen to this one. Because nothing can take me out of the security of this love, I am far less afraid than I used to be vulnerable with people. I was never vulnerable. I didn't even know what vulnerable was. I didn't even know what was inside me. I couldn't show anybody my insides because I didn't even know what was inside me. But today, I'm far less afraid to be vulnerable with other people, to open myself up, even if it backfires. You know why? Because I won't be destroyed. Because I'm going to be okay. In the end, the good news of our belovedness is God saying to us, hey, guess what? It's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Nothing can take you, Jesus says it, nothing can take you out of my hand. Nothing can separate you from the love of God. Nothing is going to destroy you. So we're terrified of being vulnerable, but what if you knew that nothing could destroy you? And you wanted to love people, and you wanted, because this is what vulnerability does. You know what the game vulnerability is? I'll show you mine, you show me yours. That's vulnerability. I'm going to open up a little to you and tell you about my journey and some of the things I've struggled with, and then maybe it'll make you feel safe with me and help you with your own journey in that same direction. So maybe my vulnerability can become a safe place. So what I'm trying to tell you is I operate from places today that are very different from places I operated from 30 years ago. And this is exactly the journey. Yours may be a little different, but that God is trying to take us on. And it changes the way that we see and relate to other people, which is what? Our relationships. We hear this confidence in Jesus. I want to read you a little passage here. First Nations version, John chapter 10. If I can find it. Here it is. I love what you hear in this passage is Jesus saying, listen, I know who I am, and the Father now is allowing me to live out of this. He says this, my Father has a great love for me. For I lay my life down and I take it back up again. No one takes my life from me. That's Jesus saying, I know who I am and who I belong to. Nobody takes my life from you. That's where we should be living, is nobody takes my life from me. I know who I am. I know who I belong to. I know this weird, quirky person God made to be, and that's who I'm going to be. No one takes my life from me, for I lay it down on my own. So no one takes it from me, but I lay it down. Isn't that, if we could just get a hold of that one thing, like I know who I am. The Christian life is not being like somebody else's doormat, right? Like I belong to God. And so your criticism, whatever, you don't like me, you don't like everything I do, whatever, like I belong to God. I know who I am, but what I choose to do out of this great repository of my belovedness and knowing who I am is I choose to let go of things and to lay it down and see how I can help you. And what I can sacrifice for you and how I can help you on this journey. No one takes my life from me. I lay it down on my own. I have the right to lay my life down and the right to take it back, and it is my Father who gives me this right. That's knowing who you are. That's centeredness. That's being rooted in that place. You know what that is? That's learning to live from the existential repository of belovedness. Now, the truth is there's so much more we could talk about with relationships, right? There's all kinds of self-reflective questions that would be great to ask, like, are you a safe person for others? Am I a safe person for others? Do I have the capacity to be vulnerable and invitational with other people? Am I emotionally aware, as in, am I aware enough of others to pay attention to what they may be experiencing in a given moment in a relationship? Because lots of people aren't aware in that way. That's why there's whole books on emotional awareness now. Because people are not often paying attention, really being intuitive and paying attention to the other person in their relationships. But what I want to end with this morning is a mystery that we often miss but need to understand and enter into. Yes, we need to deeply imbibe Jesus' way of seeing people and what he believes is the good way when it comes to how we treat people. We need that. And yes, we desperately need to find our way into living from this repository of belovedness. But as we do those things, as we grow in these ways, Jesus entices us with a mystery that goes against the fear that stalks human society. Everything around us is saying you have to put yourself first. You have to distrust people. Don't risk vulnerability. You have to make yourself powerful over others or you won't be safe or maybe you won't get what you want. And Jesus gives us this counter narrative where he says that if you love other people and you seek to bless other people, it will mysteriously become life-giving, not just for them, but for you. Listen to this. Am I in the right place? Yeah. Give. This is like one of those game shows. Anybody know the rest? Give. Oh, Ruth Kaufman gets a prize. But did you hear that? Give, and it will come back to you. It will be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and overflowing, it will be put into your bosom, your center. For with the same measure that you use, it will come full circle back into you. So yes, there's a journey, a work of coming into our belovedness. But as that happens, my sermons are way too long, aren't they? Here's the thing. It's all just this. Do not be afraid. Given it shall be given unto you. All the way we hold back, all the way we hurt other people, all the ways we don't go into our own soul or into the souls of other people, it's all fear. Jesus says, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, Diane. Given it shall be given unto you. Elmer, do not be afraid. Given it shall be given unto you. Debbie, do not be afraid. Give and it shall be given unto you. That's a secret of the kingdom of God. I can't explain it to you, but you know it's true. You've experienced it in your life. We just need to keep it right here and here so we can live it. Lord, you are so gracious to come so often to us and pull back the blinders. There is so much fear, and right now, Lord, so much hatred. And yet you are calling us into this way of life. It doesn't make everything easy. It doesn't even always make everything simple. But it is the life-giving way of life. And so help us as we journey on from this morning to fix our eyes on you and to say, Lord, lead us into these green fields, into these rushing rivers, into these blue skies of real living in our souls and from there into our relationships. We bless your name.